The unexpected encounter, the rain hammered against the windows of St. Mary's Hospital as Elena Rodriguez pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The fluorescent lights in the emergency ward buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the empty waiting room. It was nearly midnight, and her 12-hour shift was finally coming to an end. Elena had been a nurse for 8 years, but tonight felt different somehow. Heavier with an unexplainable sense of anticipation. As she gathered her belongings from the staff locker, Elena noticed the storm had grown stronger. The wind howled through the hospital corridors, and she could hear the rain battering the roof like angry fists. She pulled on her worn winter coat and stepped through the automatic doors into the bitter cold night. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a few scattered cars belonging to the night shift workers. Elena hurried toward her small blue Honda, keys jingling in her cold hands. But as she passed the hospital's side entrance, something made her stop. There, huddled against the brick wall beneath a narrow overhang, was a man. He sat with his back pressed against the cold stone, his head hanging low between his knees. His dark hair was matted with rain, and his clothes, though clearly expensive at one time, were now torn and stained. A cashmere coat hung loosely from his thin frame, and his leather shoes were scuffed and waterlogged. Elena hesitated. The hospital had strict policies about homeless individuals on the property, and security usually handled such situations. But something about this man's posture, the way his shoulders shook not just from cold, but from something deeper, made her approach. Instead of walking away, "Sir, are you all right?" Elena called out gently, stepping closer. Her voice was barely audible over the storm, but the man lifted his head slowly. His eyes were dark brown, filled with exhaustion that seemed to go beyond physical tiredness. There was something almost elegant about his features, despite the dirt and despair that marked his face. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "I just need somewhere to stay dry, just until morning. I promise I'll leave then." His words carried the weight of someone who had been turned away too many times before. Elena looked around the empty parking lot, then back at the man. Every practical part of her mind told her to call security, to follow protocol. But her heart, the same heart that had driven her to become a nurse, wouldn't let her walk away. She had seen too much suffering in her years at the hospital to ignore it when it sat right in front of her. "You can't stay here," she said softly, and she saw his face fall with resignation. "But I have a small apartment about 10 minutes away. It's not much, but it's warm and dry." The man's eyes widened with surprise, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "I couldn't ask you to do that. You don't even know me. I could be dangerous." Elena studied his face carefully. Despite his disheveled appearance, there was something inherently gentle about him. Something that told her he posed no threat. "What's your name?" she asked. "Thomas," he replied quietly. "Thomas Mitchell. Well, Thomas Mitchell. I'm Elena Rodriguez, and I'm a nurse. It's my job to help people who are hurting." She extended her hand to help him up. "Come on, before we both catch pneumonia out here." Thomas stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment, as if he had forgotten what kindness looked like. Then, slowly, he reached out and grasped it. His hand was ice cold, and Elena could feel how thin he had become. They helped him to his feet. Noticing how he swayed slightly from weakness, the drive to Elena's apartment was quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of windshield wipers and the rumble of thunder. Thomas sat hunched in the passenger seat, staring out at the blurred city lights. Elena glanced at him occasionally, wondering what circumstances had brought him to that hospital wall. Elena's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building. It was small, but clean, with warm yellow walls and mismatched furniture that somehow created a cozy atmosphere. She led Thomas inside and immediately went to adjust the thermostat. "The bathroom is down the hall if you want to clean up," she said, pulling towels from a linen closet. "I think I have some clothes that might fit you. My brother left some things here when he visited last month." Thomas stood in her small living room, looking around as if he had forgotten what a home looked like. "Why are you doing this?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know anything about me?" Lena paused in her bustling and really looked at him. Even beneath the dirt and exhaustion, she could see that this man had once been someone important. His posture, despite everything, held traces of confidence and authority. His features were refined, and there was intelligence in his eyes that spoke of education and success. "Because everyone deserves compassion," she said simply. "And because I can see that you're not supposed to be here. I don't know what happened to you, but this isn't where your story is meant to end." Elena saw tears gather in his eyes. He turned away quickly, embarrassed by his vulnerability. "I used to be someone," he whispered. "I used to matter," Elena said firmly. "Whatever happened, whoever you used to be, you still matter. Now go get cleaned up while I make some soup." As Thomas disappeared into the bathroom, Elena busied herself in the small kitchen. She heated a can of vegetable soup and made grilled cheese sandwiches, the kind of simple comfort food her mother used to make when she was sick. She could hear the shower running and tried not to think about how long it might have been since. Thomas had access to hot water. 20 minutes later, Thomas emerged wearing her brother's clothes. The jeans were slightly too short, and the sweater hung loosely on his frame, but he looked remarkably different. Clean and in fresh clothes, his natural dignity began to show through. His dark hair, now washed and combed back, revealed a face that belonged in boardrooms rather than on street corners. They ate in comfortable silence, Thomas consuming the simple meal as if it were a feast. Elena watched him carefully, noting how he held his spoon, the automatic way he placed his napkin in his lap. These were the habits of someone who had been raised with refinement, someone who had sat at many elegant tables. "Thank you, Thomas," said when he finished eating. "I can't remember the last time someone showed me such kindness." "Everyone needs help sometimes," Elena replied, collecting the empty bowls. "I've made up the couch for you. There are extra blankets in the closet. If you get cold," as Elena prepared for bed, she found herself wondering about Thomas's story. How did someone who clearly came from privilege end up homeless and alone? What had happened to strip away not just his possessions but his hope? From her bedroom, she could hear Thomas moving quietly around the living room, and she wondered if he would still be there in the morning. Something told her that his story was far from over, that perhaps their meeting tonight was the beginning of something neither of them could yet imagine. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the small apartment, two strangers had found an unexpected connection. Elena fell asleep, knowing she had done the right thing, while Thomas lay on the couch staring at the ceiling, feeling the first stirrings of hope he had experienced in months. In the morning, everything would begin to change for both of them. Though neither could have predicted the remarkable journey that lay ahead, the gradual awakening Lene woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of quiet movement in her kitchen. For a moment she was disoriented, then remembered the events of the previous night. She glanced at her alarm clock and saw it was 6 in the morning. 2 hours before she needed to leave for her day shift at the hospital, she pulled on her robe and padded to the kitchen, where she found Thomas standing at the stove. He had folded the blankets neatly on the couch and was carefully preparing breakfast. The borrowed clothes from her brother looked better on him in the morning light, and she could see that a good night's sleep had brought some color back to his cheeks. "Good morning," he said quietly, turning to face her. "I hope you don't mind. I found some eggs and bread. I wanted to make breakfast as a small thank you for your kindness." Lena smiled, touched by the gesture. "You didn't have to do that, but it smells wonderful." She noticed how naturally he moved around the kitchen, cracking eggs with practiced ease and timing the toast perfectly. These were not the skills of someone who had lived on the streets for long. They sat together at her small dining table, morning sunlight streaming through the window. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the world looking washed clean and bright. Thomas ate slowly, seeming to savor each bite, while Elena studied his profile in the gentle light. "Thomas," she said carefully, "I don't want to pry, but if you want to talk about what happened to you, I'm here to listen." Thomas set down his fork and was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. 6 months ago, I was the CEO of Sterling Industries. It's a technology company I built from nothing over 15 years. I had everything: successful business, a beautiful office, overlooking the city, people who respected me. Elena waited patiently as Thomas gathered his thoughts. She could see the pain etched in the lines around his eyes as he remembered his former life. My business partner, Victoria Sterling, and I had worked together since the beginning. I trusted her completely. She was brilliant, ambitious, and I thought she shared my vision for the company. Thomas's hands clenched slightly around his coffee cup, but she was planning something I never saw coming. He told Elena about the carefully orchestrated betrayal. How Victoria had slowly turned the board of directors against him, spreading rumors about his mental stability and financial mismanagement. She had fabricated evidence of embezzlement and presented it to investors, painting Thomas as a liability to the company's future. The worst part was how quickly everyone turned away, Thomas continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. People I had known for years, friends I thought I could count on, they all believed her lies without question. Within 2 weeks, I was voted out of my own company. My assets were frozen, pending investigation, and my reputation was destroyed. Elena reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his. That must have been devastating. I lost everything, Thomas said, looking down at their joined hands. My penthouse apartment, my car, my savings, even my dignity. The legal battles drained what little money I had left. I ended up on the streets 3 months ago, and I've been there ever since, Elena felt her heart break for this gentle man who had lost so much. Have you tried to fight back? Surely there must be some way to prove your innocence. Thomas shook his head sadly. Victoria was very thorough. She had been planning this for years, creating false documents, building her case slowly. My lawyer, David Chen, is the only person who still believes me, but even he says the evidence against me is overwhelming. Where is this David now? Elena asked. Have you been in contact with him? I haven't spoken to him in 2 months, Thomas admitted. I lost my phone when I lost my apartment, and I've been too ashamed to reach out. He probably thinks I've given up completely. Elena stood up decisively. Well, we're going to change that right now. She retrieved her phone from the counter and handed it to Thomas. Call him. Today. Thomas stared at the phone as if it were a foreign object. I don't know if I can face that conversation. What if he's moved on? What if he doesn't want to help anymore? Then at least you'll know, Elena said firmly. But what if he's been waiting for you to call? What if he has new information that could help your case? With trembling fingers, Thomas dialed David's number. Elena busied herself clearing the breakfast dishes, giving him privacy while staying close enough to offer support. She watched as Thomas's face went through a range of emotions during the call, from fear to surprise to something that might have been hope. David, Thomas said into the phone, his voice cracking slightly. It's me, Thomas Mitchell. Elena could hear the excited voice on the other end of the line, though she couldn't make out the words. Thomas's posture straightened as he listened, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw a glimpse of the confident businessman he once had. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. When Thomas finally hung up, his eyes were bright with tears, but they were tears of relief rather than despair. He's been looking for me everywhere, Thomas said, wonder in his voice. He never gave up. He said he has new evidence that Victoria falsified documents, and there's a former employee willing to testify about her fraudulent activities. Elena felt a surge of excitement. That's wonderful news. What happens next? He wants to meet with me this afternoon. He says we can start building a case to not only clear my name, but potentially regain control of the company. Thomas looked at Elena with gratitude shining in his eyes. If you hadn't pushed me to make that call, I might never have known. Elena smiled warmly. Sometimes we all need someone to believe in us when we can't believe in ourselves. The rest of the morning passed quickly. Elena had to leave for her shift at the hospital, but she gave Thomas her spare key and told him to make himself at home. Before she left, she pressed some money into his hand for lunch and transportation to meet with David. I can't take this, Thomas protested, but Elena was firm. Consider it an investment in your future, she said with a smile. Besides, nurses are used to taking care of people. It's what we do. During her shift at the hospital, Elena found herself thinking about Thomas constantly. She wondered how his meeting with David was going and whether the new evidence would be enough to help him reclaim his life. Several of her colleagues noticed her distraction, but she kept Thomas's story to herself. respecting his privacy. When she returned home that evening, she found Thomas sitting at her small dining table, surrounded by papers and documents. He looked up when she entered, and she was struck by the transformation in his appearance. Though he was still wearing her brother's borrowed clothes, he sat straighter, his eyes were clearer, and there was an energy about him that hadn't been there that morning. "Elena," he said, standing to greet her. "David brought over all the case files we've been working all afternoon, and I think we might actually have a chance." Elena set down her purse and moved closer to look at the papers spread across her table. She couldn't understand most of the legal documents and financial statements, but she could see the passion returning to Thomas's face as he explained the intricacies of his case. "Victoria made one crucial mistake," Thomas said, pointing to a highlighted section of a contract. She backdated several documents. "But David found the original email timestamps that prove they were created after my supposed embezzlement began. It's the smoking gun we needed." Elena felt a wave of pride watching Thomas come alive as he discussed strategy and legal precedents. This was the man he was meant to be, not the broken soul she had found huddled against the hospital wall. "There's something else," Thomas said, his voice growing softer. "David wants to hold a press conference next week to announce that we're challenging Victoria's takeover. But Elena, I want you to know that even if we lose, even if I never get the company back, you've already given me something more valuable." "What's that?" Elena asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "You gave me back my belief that good people still exist in this world," Thomas said, reaching for her hand. "You reminded me that I'm worth fighting for." As they worked together that evening, organizing documents and preparing for the legal battle ahead, Elena realized that something had fundamentally shifted between them. What had begun as a simple act of compassion had blossomed into something deeper, a connection that transcended their different backgrounds and circumstances. The small apartment felt charged with possibility as they planned Thomas's comeback, neither of them knowing that the most challenging part of their journey still lay ahead. The truth revealed 3 weeks had passed since Thomas began working with David to rebuild his case, and Elena's small apartment had transformed into an unofficial war room. Legal documents covered every surface, and the dining table had become command central for what David dramatically called Operation Restoration. Thomas had changed remarkably during this time. The broken man Elena had found in the rain was gone, replaced by someone who radiated quiet confidence and determination. He had purchased new clothes with money David had advanced him, and his natural charisma was beginning to shine through again. Elena watched him during these weeks with growing admiration and something deeper that she was afraid to name. She had seen him at his lowest point and witnessed his incredible resilience. The way he strategized with David, the careful attention he paid to every detail of his case, and his unwavering belief in justice, despite everything he had endured. All of it drew her to him in ways she hadn't expected. On a crisp Thursday morning, David arrived at the apartment with news that would change everything. His usually composed demeanor was replaced with barely contained excitement as he burst through the door. "Thomas, Elena, you need to sit down for this," David said, setting his briefcase on the table with dramatic flair. "Got her." And Elena exchanged glances before settling on the couch together. Over the past weeks, they had grown comfortable, with casual touches and shared looks, though neither had acknowledged the growing attraction between them. "Victoria made a critical error," David continued, pulling out a thick folder. "Remember James Harrison, the former Sterling Industries accountant who suddenly quit right before your supposed embezzlement was discovered? Victoria said he left because he was disgusted by my financial misconduct. Well, James Harrison just came forward with some very interesting information," David said with a satisfied smile. "It turns out Victoria had been pressuring him to alter financial records for months. When he refused, she threatened to destroy his career. He quit rather than participate in her scheme, but he kept copies of everything." Elena felt her heart racing as David spread out photocopied documents and email printouts. Even she could see that these papers looked different from the ones Victoria had used to destroy Thomas's reputation. These emails proved that Victoria was systematically embezzling money from the company and framing you for her crimes, David explained. She was planning to sell Sterling Industries to a competitor and disappear with the profits. Thomas studied the documents with growing amazement. This proves everything we suspected. But David, why did James wait so long to come forward? He was scared, David replied honestly. Victoria has powerful connections, and he feared for his safety. But when he saw the press coverage about our intention to fight back, he realized he couldn't stay silent anymore. Elena watched Thomas process this information, seeing hope and determination warring with years of accumulated pain. She reached for his hand, offering silent support as he absorbed the magnitude of what these revelations meant. "What happens now?" Elena asked, speaking for both of them. David's smile grew even wider. "Now we go public. I've scheduled a press conference for tomorrow morning. The media loves a good comeback story, and this has everything: betrayal, corporate espionage, and justice finally being served." The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, but Elena had never seen Thomas look more confident. He had spent hours the night before practicing his statement, and she had helped him choose a navy suit that David had selected, knowing that image would be crucial for the press conference. The Sterling Industries headquarters building buzzed with activity as reporters and camera crews set up outside. Elena stood at the back of the crowd, having insisted she didn't need to be part of the official proceedings, though Thomas had wanted her by his side. When Thomas stepped up to the podium, flanked by David and James Harrison, Elena felt a surge of pride that took her breath away. This was the man Victoria Sterling had tried to destroy, but he had survived and fought back with grace and determination. 6 months ago, my business partner and former friend Victoria Sterling orchestrated an elaborate scheme to steal my company and destroy my reputation, Thomas began, his voice carrying clearly across the crowd of reporters. Today, with the help of my attorney David Chen and the courage of former Sterling Industries accountant James Harrison, I can prove that every accusation made against me was fabricated. The crowd erupted with questions as David presented the evidence. Elena watched Thomas field inquiries with the skill of someone born for leadership, answering each question honestly while maintaining his dignity throughout the aggressive questioning. Mr. Mitchell called out a reporter from the local news station. "What are your plans now that your innocence has been established?" Thomas paused, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found Elena's face among the reporters. For a moment his professional composure softened, and she saw the man who had eaten breakfast at her small table just that morning. "Sterling Industries was built on innovation and integrity," Thomas replied, his gaze returning to the cameras. "Under Victoria Sterling's leadership, it has lost both. The board of directors has already voted to remove her from all positions, and I will be resuming my role as CEO effective immediately." The questions continued for another 20 minutes, but Elena barely heard them. She was thinking about what this meant for Thomas, for them, the future they might build together. After the press conference, Thomas found Elena waiting by her car in the parking lot. The transformation in him was complete now. He stood tall, his shoulders back, every inch the successful businessman he had always been. But when he looked at her, his expression was soft and vulnerable. "So," Elena said with a teasing smile, "I guess this means you won't be needing my couch anymore?" Thomas stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "Lena, I need to tell you something that I should have said weeks ago." "That?" she asked, though her heart was already racing with anticipation. "I love you," Thomas said simply. "Not because you saved me that night, though you did. Not because you believed in me when no one else would, though you did that too. I love you because you're the kindest, strongest, most amazing woman I've ever met, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Elena felt tears gathering in her eyes as she reached up to touch his face. "I love you too, Thomas Mitchell. I think I started falling for you the moment you made me breakfast in my own kitchen." When he kissed her, right there in the parking lot, surrounded by the chaos of reporters and camera crews, Elena knew that this was just the beginning of their story together. Thomas had reclaimed his company and his reputation, but more importantly, they had found something neither had been looking for: a love that had grown from compassion into something unbreakable. 6 months later, Elena stood in the elegant ballroom of the city's finest hotel, wearing a flowing cream dress and watching Thomas address the Sterling Industries shareholders at their annual meeting. The company had not only recovered from Victoria's mismanagement, but had grown stronger under Thomas's renewed leadership. Victoria Sterling had been sentenced to 8 years in prison for embezzlement and corporate fraud. The scandal had made national news, but Thomas had handled the media attention with characteristic grace, always emphasizing the importance of integrity in business and the power of second chances. As Thomas concluded his remarks to thunderous applause, he stepped down from the podium and made his way directly to Elena. In front of hundreds of shareholders, employees, and business leaders, he took her hand and addressed the crowd one final time. "Before we conclude tonight's meeting, I want to share something personal," Thomas said, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. "Last year I learned that success isn't measured only in profit margins and stock prices. True success is measured in the relationships we build and the kindness we show to others." He turned to Elena, pulling a small velvet box from his jacket pocket. "Elena Rodriguez, you saved my life in every way that matters. You showed me that even in our darkest moments, there are angels walking among us, disguised as nurses with warm hearts and generous spirits." Elena gasped as Thomas dropped to one knee, the entire ballroom falling silent around them. "Will you marry me?" he asked, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring that caught the light from the chandeliers above. Through her tears of joy, Elena looked down at the man who had traveled from the depths of despair to the heights of success, always maintaining his integrity and kindness. The same hands that now held an engagement ring had once trembled from cold and hunger. The same voice asking her to be his wife had once whispered desperate pleas for shelter. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Thomas Mitchell, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, the ballroom erupted in celebration. But Elena barely heard the applause and cheers around them. She was thinking about a rainy night months ago when she had made the simple decision to show kindness to a stranger, never imagining it would lead to the greatest love of her life. Later that evening, as they danced alone on the empty ballroom floor, Thomas whispered in her ear, "Thank you for saving me, Elena Rodriguez." She smiled up at him, her heart full of love and promise for their future together. "Thank you for letting me, Thomas Mitchell." Outside, the city sparkled with lights, but inside the ballroom, two souls who had found each other in the darkness danced toward a bright and beautiful tomorrow, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin with the simplest acts of human kindness. Their story would become legendary in business circles, not just as a tale of corporate comeback, but as a reminder that compassion and love can triumph over betrayal and despair. And every year on the anniversary of the night they met, Thomas and Elena would return to that same hospital wall where their journey began, leaving warm meals and blankets for anyone who might need the same kindness that had changed their lives forever.